It's important to understand that players are not just buying D&D when they play a paid game. They are often buying a very specific emotional fantasy of what they want the game to feel like for them. A lot of GMs unconsciously think paid games are going to function kind of like home games. But that's not exactly true because those things are not exactly the same. Sometimes players leave paid games before the table has had enough time to correct course on one or more of these issues, right? That's one of the most important truths that I've learned lately, and that's kind of what I'm trying to share with you in this video. Good morning, friends. Welcome back to Gym Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the Gym Philosopher. Today we're talking about something really important, guys, and I kind of want to update this. I've been talking about this a lot lately, but I have some updated information about this that I want to share. Why players sometimes leave paid games fast and abruptly. Okay, I'm running 4 different pro games right now, all via start playing, and my groups are almost full. I onboarded a player for one of my games this last week, and it went really well, I thought, right? Me and this player seemed to have really great chemistry. We were talking back and forth, creating the character, getting them onboarded, and then we played the session. All seemed fine, and then they dropped a message to me saying, I don't know about this game. I have big doubts about this. Now, this is kind of unusual. Usually, players just leave if they have some kind of doubts or something, I imagine, right? Because we've been talking a lot about how sometimes in pro games, you can get player churn. Sometimes players will just leave abruptly. I've been talking to a number of DMs running paid games that this happens to. And at a certain point, this is probably going to happen to you if you're wanting to run paid games. But this player gave me really interesting insight into what was wrong. I actually talked about wanting to maybe try to change it, make it better, and such and such. And so I gleaned a lot of insight from that conversation that I want to share with you today. Not necessarily the conversation, because that's just one conversation, but the insight I gleaned from it, I think, is important. For those of you who are out here wanting to run paid games, but you're wondering why do the players sometimes leave abruptly? Well, I've got some insight I'm going to share with you. So let's start at the beginning here. A player joins your game. They seem excited. They build a cool character. Maybe they even tell you they're looking forward to it. And then 1 session later, 2 sessions, maybe 3 if you're lucky, they are gone. No long conversations, no big dramatic confrontation, sometimes barely any explanation at all. They just leave. And if you're newer to running paid games, or even if you've been doing it for a little while, that can really mess with your head. You may start wondering, was it me? Was it the group? Was the campaign bad? Did I do something wrong, right? Did I offend them or upset them? Could this have been fixed if I had just, had more time, or if I would have tried harder? And what I want to tell you today, right, GM to GM, is this. Sometimes, yes, things could have been improved, and we will learn about those things over time. But the deeper truth that I want to explain to you in this video is this. Paid online games have very thin social glue in the beginning, okay? And once you understand that, a lot of this starts making way more sense. Here's the big misunderstanding that a lot of GMs have. A lot of GMs unconsciously think paid games are going to function kind of like home games. So in other words, you might think to yourself, if I'm great at running games at home, I should have no problem running paid games, right? But that's not exactly true, because those things are not exactly the same. Obviously, they are close, but they're not exactly the same. In a home game, people will often tolerate a lot more weirdness than they would in a paid game. They'll tolerate awkward pacing, tone drift, somebody being annoying, a few sessions that are rough around the edges. They'll tolerate some confusion about the plot and things like that, right? Why? Because there are other things holding the group together. There's often friendship. Okay, there is history, there's loyalty, there's shared social identity. There's the fact that this is just what the group does on Thursdays. It could also be the fact that these people know and care about each other outside the game, right? That keeps them together. This stuff is all glue. And in online paid games, especially in the beginning, the glue is often not there yet. At first, all the player really has is the game experience itself. That's it. That means the player is sitting there, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, asking, is this worth my time? Is this worth my energy? Is this worth my money? Do I like this group? Do I trust this GM? Does my character matter here? Does this feel like the kind of game I thought I was buying into when I first read it and signed up for it? And if the answer starts wobbling at all early on, they may leave, and fast. And the truth about this might sting a little bit, guys. Here's the painful part. Sometimes players leave paid games before the table has had enough time to correct course on one or more of these issues, right? That's one of the most important truths that I've learned lately, and that's kind of what I'm trying to share with you in this video. In a free game, a player may stick around long enough for the chemistry to improve. In a paid game, they may not, even if it could and probably will improve. That does not mean they're bad people. It does not mean you're a bad GM. And that does not mean that every complaint they have is automatically right or a reason to change what you're doing. And that can be very confusing, right? But it does mean that early friction carries a lot more weight than most GMs realize in paid games. This is why onboarding matters a lot. This is why clarity matters a lot. This is why first impressions matter a lot. But this is also why the table tone matters, why spotlight control matters, why group fit matters. And sometimes, aside from the fact that you've let these other players into your game, there's not much you can do about group fit. Because in paid games, the idea of we'll smooth it out later doesn't always apply. Or once everyone gets to know each other, it'll be smoother flowing, or it'll feel better, or there'll be more glue. That doesn't really exist, because players will sometimes, if they do not find exactly the game experience they're looking for, they will leave. They'll leave way before any of that has a chance to develop. The reason being is because they will feel like their money is going into something that is not what they exactly want. It's important to understand that players are not just buying D&D when they play a paid game. This is another thing paid GMs really, I think, need to understand. And this is something that I've learned a lot over the 3 months that I've been running pro games via Start Playing. Players are not just buying a D&D game. They are often buying a very specific emotional fantasy of what they want the game to feel like for them. One player may want some serious immersion. One may want tactical mastery. One may want deep character drama. One may want a dark and gritty tone. One may want goofy fun with good people. One may want professional polish on the game, right? One may want fast pacing or more role play or less chaos. Some players want to feel like they're literally in a novel and creating one with their character. Some may want to feel like they're in a war film, or that they're creating one, like a cinematic battle movie with their characters. And then some may just want to feel like they matter right away. That might mean way more to them than it does to others. So when a player joins your paid game, they're not just testing whether it is good and giving it a little time to see. They're testing whether it completely matches the version of good that they came looking for. And the version of good is the key phrase, because their version of that is in their mind. They have it usually preconceived, and the GM may not know this, may or may not even have a group that's in the same vision. And even if the GM wants to be delivering this, there's a question of whether or not the way that the GM interprets it is the same way that the player interprets it. Basically, when players join a paid game, at first, they're testing whether the game is solid in a general sense, yes, but they're more looking to see if it actually matches exactly what they're looking for, right? Does that make sense? So a game could even be solid in a general sense, but if it doesn't contain the specific things they're looking for, it may be a no-go for them. And this can lead to players literally bouncing, like right away, sometimes without explanation, and sometimes without even talking about it. That's not random, but what it is an actual mismatch of desires versus what the game is delivering. One thing that can really help with this is building emotional resonance early on. This can really help to reduce friction and increase glue. Understanding how to build emotional resonance at your table, which makes your players feel more attached to the story and also helps them to feel a deeper resonance emotionally for what's going on. This can really help increase retention, help players feel like the story is really important to them, help them to see the story as something that matters, that actually matters, that they can buy into. Now, I have a book about how to do this. It's called The Advanced Art of TTRPG Game Mastery. This is 24 years of running games, the knowledge, wisdom gleaned from building emotional resonance packed into 50 pages. This book literally teaches you how to build crazy, awesome emotional resonance that'll keep your players wanting to come back again and again. If you feel like you need some extra glue in your games, emotional resonance may be the key. So that's probably the best thing that's going to help with this specific problem. Actually, a very, very good counter to losing players. Make sure that you grab that. Links in the description. Is still available for a low introductory price, but that's probably the best thing I've ever written about how to be a successful GM and keep players engaged at your table. And it's going to help you in your paid games just as much as it helps you in your home games. So make sure you grab that. Don't miss it. I'm going to give you kind of a broad example here. Okay. Imagine a player joins a paid campaign because they want a serious, immersive, character-driven story, and they think that this campaign looks like it would deliver that. They show up, they're ready, they put a bunch of effort into their character, right? Maybe you onboarded them great, blah, blah, blah. But then in the first session, they encounter a whole cluster of NPCs traveling with the party. The tone feels a little looser than they expected. Another player's style feels more jokey or snarky than immersive to them. Maybe the group feels a little scattered to them, right? Maybe there's no clear center of gravity in the group as far as like the story is going, right? There's no like gritty, hardcore center of the story. Now, every single one of those things that I just described may not be a bad thing in your game, and it may all have good context behind it. Maybe the NPCs all have a reason to be there. Maybe that player actually does take the game seriously, the one who sounded jokey and snarky, but their social mannerisms just tend to make it feel lighter, and that's just the way they express themselves. Maybe the campaign really does have depth, even if it doesn't look like it right away, because there's a lot of context that is built up and led to here that is meaningful, but the new player isn't picking up on that because they weren't there for it. And then maybe if all of these things were allowed to come together and just mingle for a few sessions, everything would settle into a beautiful, reinterpretation of the story based on this new character's energy and the characters who were in it before, and it would emerge as something even better than what had already been there. This is likely what would happen if players did join a good game and they played it through. And this is what a lot of GMs probably do realize, and you're probably right about this, probably not wrong about it. However, it is really important to understand that when new players join a paid game and they're paying to be there, they are highly unlikely to stay long enough to find that out. It's not impossible. It does happen sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't. And in such cases, the player may just bounce fast. And if they're not the kind of people who like talking through things, if they feel like it would be conflicting or it would feel negative or something, they may not even want to talk with you about it. They may literally bounce and then just block you because, and I've had this happen sometimes. This is kind of rare, but I've experienced this. And it may be because they are so against the idea of talking about it or having any kind of the fear of confrontation or conflict or something, because it sometimes does not feel good to talk about problems. And if they're paying to come have a game experience, they may not feel like they owe you a talking about problems, and they may not even want to talk about it because it may make them deeply uncomfortable. So I'm just saying, I'm trying to give you an example of how these things could go. As a paid GM, it's really important for you to understand that reality and to also, to a point, accept it and respect it. Now, churn sometimes feels harsher in paid games, okay? Because it tends to be cleaner, if that makes sense. There's way less padding. When a friend leaves a home game, it's usually wrapped in a lot of context, and there's a lot of conversation about it, and there's a lot more going on. But when a paying player leaves an online game, especially abruptly and soon, it can feel like a very concrete, fast verdict. And sometimes it kind of is a verdict, but it's not always a verdict that means something bad about your campaign or that you need to change something. And that's what the tricky part can be. Realizing that is important. Sometimes the verdict is more about fit with other players. Sometimes it's more about expectations that are very specific that you may not have any control over. Sometimes it's about first session friction. Sometimes you can do things to reduce that, but sometimes that's going to happen a little bit organically. And to be really honest, it takes a lot of practice to learn how to head off all friction, especially if you're a newer GM or if you haven't been running games for years and years and years. And if you haven't been keenly aware of this problem, it can be hard to head it off. That's not always a death knell, but for new players in paid games, it can be, especially up front. And then here's another mistake that GMs make sometimes. Sometimes the mistake is that when a GM takes every fast departure personally, they can turn it into I'm a terrible GM kind of idea, or they can turn it into the player was clearly ridiculous and had expectations that were impossible to meet. But usually the truth isn't so stark here. A lot of times the truth lands very much in the middle. Okay. So what should you do about it as a game master? Well, here's what you should do. First, you should understand this principle. The glue is thin at first. Okay. If you understand that, it changes how you will run paid games and think about players leaving. If you understand this, then you'll stop assuming players will give you a long runway. This is important. Assume players are not going to give you a long runway for problems. It's also important to stop assuming they'll wait around for chemistry to develop, because they probably won't. Also, it's important to stop assuming that they'll automatically see the larger vision of the table. They probably aren't going to stick around to see that. Instead, here's what you want to start asking. How do I reduce friction early? This is something you can control. How do I create buy-in fast? This is something you can also control. How do I make the experience feel clear, strong, and worth staying for? This is something that you have some control over. And then how do I help the right players feel at home quickly, make them feel significant in the game? That can change a lot, and those are things you can do, okay? Here are the things that I think maybe matter the most when you're bringing in new players in the face of understanding that the glue is thin and you want to maximize the chances that players will stay. Number one, be brutally clear about the tone of your game. If your game is dark, say it's dark. If it's loose and chaotic, say that. And I don't mean just the game in general or your style. I mean the actual game they're joining, if you have any concept of that, if it's been an ongoing game. If it's highly immersive and serious, say that. If humor is common at your table, say that too, because I didn't maybe realize how much that can matter. Clarity filters better than charm, okay? Here's the second thing you can do. Onboard players like you actually care. Do not treat onboarding like paperwork. The early phase is when the players are deciding whether they belong. That means you need to help them feel welcomed, included, informed, and connected as quickly as possible. The third thing you can do is manage table chemistry aggressively. And here's what I mean by that. I don't mean to be a tyrant. I mean, understand that other players affect retention enormously. This actually is important. A player might leave your game not because of your lore, your prep, or your combat design, but because one table dynamic rubbed them the wrong way and the game did not feel worth navigating. Now, what do you do about this? Well, sometimes you can talk to the players. Sometimes you may have to understand that having this player or these two players in a game might be pushing other players away. And then it's up to you to decide whether those two players are worth it or whether they're actually not a good fit for your table. If they're pushing away the kind of players you want to have in your game, that might be a problem. That might be something that you have to deal with and address. And that's no fun. Sometimes it'd be that way, guys. The fourth thing you can do, protect spotlight and relevance. If a new player does not feel like they matter, you're already in dangerous territory. Players stay when they feel seen. They stay when their characters matter to the story. They stay when their presence actually changes things and makes a difference. Okay, so giving players spotlight and significance through roleplay and story, this can actually really help them feel like a part of the story. And if you do this really well, that builds glue quickly. Here's the fifth thing you can do. Accept that not every player is the right player. And this is maybe the hardest one of all, guys. This one does matter a lot. You should care about churn. You should try to learn from it. And you should try to improve your GMing. But you should not become a nervous weather vane, spinning around at every gust of dissatisfaction. Some players are simply not going to be your people. And that's actually very okay because you need to be yourself and be unique to stand out in this world. If you try to please everyone, you're going to please no one and you're not going to be interesting. Trying to become everyone's favorite flavor usually makes your game weaker, not stronger. Okay. And here's the paradox. There's a strange beauty to all of this. The glue is thin at first, but if you get the right players into the right game and they start sharing real story together, that glue gets a lot stronger. Once people have shared victories, inside jokes, character bonds, emotional scenes together, conflict, loss, surprise, community, retention does get easier. Now they're not just paying for session, they're attached to your table. Now the game has a heartbeat of its own. There's a history to it. Now there is more glue, guys. But the early phase is delicate. It's very delicate. And I think a lot of paid GMs underestimate how delicate it is. So here's the final truth I want to leave you with today. Why do players sometimes leave paid games fast and abruptly? Not always because the game is bad. Not always because the GM failed. Not always because the player is overly picky. Sometimes they leave because the social glue is thin, the friction showed up early, and the experience did not immediately feel aligned enough to justify staying. That's the real truth. And honestly, once you understand that, you can stop taking every fast exit as a mystical curse from the dungeon gods. And you can start looking at it more clearly. You can say, was this a bad fit? Was it bad onboarding? Was there bad tone clarity? Was there weak player connections? Was there too much friction early on? Or was this player just not really a good fit for the table and it's okay that they left? Maybe even better, right? This is a much healthier and more professional way to think about it if you're running pro games, okay? So there's my 2 cents on the matter, guys. Drop a comment, let me know what you think. I really appreciate every single one of you. Don't get discouraged out here. You're doing a great job. Running games is important and keeping players is a challenge, but you can do it. Roll me some D100s at your next game, guys. Empowering game masters to run better games is the goal here, and I'll see you awesome people on the next one.